tunda metabasoe kwebade o tetuza tikun kitu ya kuchi te kwe tisungda ota manda chus.
So here, where we had left off in the text, we were talking about in the preliminaries, the contemplation of death and impermanence, recognizing that this very difficult to obtain and precious rebirth that we have right now is not something that will remain. It is going to perish. We are going to be separated from this life. We are going to have to face death in the sense that this life is impermanent, in the same way that all compounded things, all things that are subject to causes and conditions will perish. But we have this sense that like the life that we have right now is somehow stable and lasting. We sort of grasp at it as being permanent. But as Aryadeva has said, this is kind of a paraphrasing, that there's really only a breath separates us from life and death. Although it seems like this thing that we have, this life that we have, is so sort of stable and lasting, it's really only something that continues due to all kinds of various conditions. We have to have breath, and we have to have oxygen and our blood pumping and so forth. There's so many things happening moment to moment for us to be alive. There isn't this kind of stable, solid thing that we call life that's just remaining, but we grasp at it as being permanent. We don't know how long we are going to be here, but we sort of think that we are going to be here for a long time and thereby get caught up in our afflictions, doing all kinds of worldly work, not recognizing that we are going to have to face death. And so it isn't that we talk about death and impermanence to scare people or to sort of create fear, but rather to recognize the reality. The end of birth is death. This is what we all have to face. So really things are going to change. As the verse says, the end of accumulation is disintegration, and the end of going high is coming low. The end of meeting is separation, and the end of birth is death. And so we have this kind of thought like, oh, I will remain, I will be here. But we need to face the reality that we are going to have to be separated from not just our possessions, everything that we have accumulated, our loved ones, our friends, and our family, but we will have to separate even from our own body. And so whatever it is that we try to grasp onto, we recognize that it is the nature of things, that they will perish, that they will change. And this contemplation of death and impermanence is thereby really important. In the way that we talk about compassion as being an important thing to contemplate, there's nothing better for really causing us to abandon non-virtue and to make an effort at virtue. The Kadampa masters stressed the importance of this kind of contemplation in terms of compelling us to really make those efforts to abandon negative actions, recognizing that, again, the sort of, some people fear death in the sense that they think, oh, when I die, I will become non-existent, like I won't be here anymore. But there's not really that non-existence. It's a separation between the continuum of mind and this body. So while we have to give up this body, the real fear shouldn't be about death itself, but really where we are going to go. And so the purpose of thinking about death and impermanence is in order for us to pay attention to the kind of causes that we are creating, to make us do more virtue and abandon non-virtue.
Oh yeah. Oh, teni ta daga do che meda ba che te chele lende de udwa. Oh, te de ko che de ten to tenge ma ba do de. Yo chima chulang ko de. Yo la ya yo de sti yu to ta da. Yo chima yo yo ya ta yo sambu le ku ta. Tung ye ta yo me ba le ku de ka re se ne. Le ke wa sa. Le me ke wa sa. Ke wa ta me ke le che su do da. Oh, te de ta ko yo chima Deve giù, ti dirà deve io ci ma pepe giuro, o degli anni di lei giungere sono guda. Io ci ma da scendere a te io e tu lei che ho la cini di me, scena so pa bala so va. Mi che giù un sitende so ba chamba so a cha giù simle so ba carina. Te so li abun be. Ani tu ngai giù e giù. Mi che va tu ya ne pa lei giungere. Ti cu che ti lente sono gude so gara. O ti dirà.
And then we need to contemplate karma, cause and effect. So here, in order to determine the kind of birth that we take to have a good rebirth in the future, then we need to recognize, well, what are the causes? The kind of virtuous causes will lead us to a good rebirth. And if we accumulate non-virtue, that's going to lead to propelling us into a bad rebirth. So this recognition that causes are creating the causes for our future happiness right now. And so abandoning harming others, doing positive actions will lead to doing things like contemplating love and compassion and bodhicitta will lead to our future happiness. And the causes that lead to our suffering are things that we should abandon. So here, this is the contemplation of karma, cause and effect.
Oh yeah, Nambachina ko Rala Maubana Titu Kari Susu Legis Stranguara. Kenda Chiba Bolis of Tindre di Omarto. Oti in the tickets Burese, Susu Legis do Tangita and Granny Dese. Nasasane Cheneco, Susu Labay Vesura Shegara. Anita Granny Dish and the Sushi Gondicus. Susu kept the Susu Chet of Grace of Gara. Gara Sene Susu Kidi Ilando Latani Titu Mauba Yunguara. This is the social round of the Jara. The cutie saw said to any revenue deco round gave a mara cutil ten revenue. But you indico subsocial carsore, Tibuki to the Jangore, some good. Oh, it is a match and till quiet to meet him Gura. That is a shame watch it. Don't I let and Numobe shower the song and then make it a ledge sauna. Yes, on the to me, I couldn't do Gura. How never Numobe shower the song, the village Sabayina, and then had a meta and it eventually do Gura. For actually to it. Chita lake was on a kanga call Kokura King never Omara. Arazu call Koya Cutie, I oh, George Matishan Digmaris and Ganzing Kunela Giora, Rala Shenjak Kunela Giora, or Tila Duene, Yamu Kunela and Lake Kiwasagiora or Miguel Chupa Kiwachitu. Tis in the Koya Choli Dugara. Tiwage, led on Yumubuage, Shawadu Chune, Nyanduta Tendu Kawakevina, led on Yumubuage, Kiwachi Lang Chijetel Telekoroasikta, Dwari Truce. Till Chilico, Tinder Dotesera. The call to me Rashimato Yanski Omarwa. Lenu Gishawacha, so Rawameva. To see the territory. Chita Case to me, Jue to me, Sarah Mabuera. Cabantuji to me. Hamal get a to shoot the cigar, sometimes she gets in. Oh, Cabantuji to us. Lenu Gishawacha. Nyamo Shawa the song less at Tisha to Chen any Pumbule. Karine Titu Kagayongara, or Tindi, Yella Tunga Tonga, or Tia Budimadusa, Teletaro, Chingabacha Budusam, the Tare Soso, Soso Samatan, Soso Lapayori Samsa, or Tindita Koyan Misane, some any call it Handegilo, Nerachi Bumaiba Simjetamje, there's some Teogra, or Tindibachin.
So then here, if we are Buddhist, really Buddhists assert that one's own happiness and suffering is in your own hands. As the Buddha has said, you are your own master. No one else can be your master, as in no one else is going to do it for you. The kind of suffering and happiness that we experience in the future is due to the causes that we ourselves create. So we have the kind of freedom, the autonomy to choose what we are doing, what kind of experiences we will have in the future due to what we are doing now. Once we have created those actions, then they're going to bring about their results. We don't really have a choice in that. So we need to be cautious with respect to our actions, aware of that. And so here, when one first contemplates, you recognize that, okay, if I accumulate positive, virtuous karma, then I'm going to take rebirth as a human or a god. And if I do something negative, non-virtuous karma, and will take a lower rebirth. But really, the defects of taking birth due to the force of karma and the afflictions. So if we have this sense of like I, a kind of feeling of I, and then we engage in positive actions, we are creating the causes for a good rebirth, but it is still within samsara. And we have a kind of clinging to ourselves, say wanting a good rebirth in the future, and therefore we do those kinds of positive actions. And while this is better than falling into the lower realms from doing non-virtue, someone who thinks along these lines sees that, well, taking rebirth, so we can talk about the kind of 6 types of beings who cycle in samsara, and they all take rebirth under the control of karma and the afflictions. And so wherever you are born, it's not beyond that nature of suffering. And this is because you don't have the kind of autonomy and control. You are subject to the results of the karma that you have created in the past. So whatever sort of rebirth one takes under the control of karma and the afflictions, this is going to be in the nature of suffering. And we can again talk about the kind of suffering and the suffering of change, but really the suffering of conditioned existence, that pervasive suffering of conditioned existence being under the control of karma and one's afflictions. When you see the defects of that, you then wish to get out of that. There's a desire for liberation from that cycle of suffering. And going beyond that, you see that you want that not just for yourself, but for all sentient beings. So this is the kind of contemplation of the defects of samsara and wanting to get out of that entirely.
Oh yeah. That I'm going to thank you, church. This are the tanda lojo nyamli de konge kansatela, thank you kansatela. Chita labreta church body atisha kibabe. Tanda tindreshete tezulia koada tezula rochane tos. Nyamyu yogesh, thank you kansatela, tindresh kore sugura. That tambudi shesara. Disha, tangibatere. Nibati kansatela. Niba lo yuba tiuna ta niba tiuga lo cha tindise lo jo niba tel karsana ne mushi chanju gisem shegdwa chanju sem de la ni yora tandam chanju gisem da kunju chanju gisem sta da de kap shedla o ti de tandam chanju gisem sene tomba ni musum du tobe ishitela tandam chanju gisem sigara kunzu chanju gisem sene semje tamje gutando sanje je koba toba chagi sam ela kunzu chanju gisem sigara kunzu sede karasana semje tamje gutando tugenge sanje ge sugu kutela semje tamje le pando tarchimbe kone shenle chu tenge ge kansa shenle tenge yube kansa sugu titandi ni gwara shende sugu sigda rande shenle chu tenge Go se vende kundenge kibushi de june ne shala choto genge sanje jura chegi yinse kansa de juwa kansa june shal ten choshe wara oti sota kunzu be ku sukulen to mege wara chanju semde chotenge sukuti lando ne tenge oti sota kunzu chanju ke semsigdo oti de tandele tambo tomba ni kor shege tambo tomba ni korshe, tanda be korshe. Niba kunzu chanju sembu sunzu chimbuda. Tande cheru buchi chesonga bachimbu sunashana. Tambo kunzu chanju gisemshe. Tanda chanju semdi chesu she lo sutera. Tesunda kunzu chanju gisemdi ngelshiga.
So that is then the first point of first train in the preliminaries. So one, to be a sort of basis for these teachings needs to have some familiarity, some training with these preliminaries, whether it is from the stages of the path, literature, or elsewhere, that one has trained one's mind. And then we turn to training in the awakening mind, which is the main practice of the text. So the main practice, this awakening, training in the awakening mind, then has 2 components: the ultimate mind of awakening and then conventional mind of awakening. And so here, ultimate bodhicitta is the wisdom which directly realizes emptiness. That's what we are referring to with ultimate bodhicitta. And conventional bodhicitta, or the conventional mind of awakening, being is that thought to attain Buddhahood for the sake of all sentient beings, attain this state in which you have eliminated all faults and developed all good qualities. And so here one is really primarily observing the form body, or having that as the objective, in that one is thinking about working for the welfare of other sentient beings, having perfected the realizations and abandonments within one's own mind. You then take on the form, have the ability to teach those points of what to adopt and abandon to others. And so that's the kind of main thing that one is striving for, is the welfare of other sentient beings through that taking on that form body. So these two practices, the ultimate mind of awakening and conventional mind of awakening, are taught in slightly different orders, but following the kind of commentarial tradition of Gelamo Tsongkhapa, we will begin with training in the conventional awakening mind.
Oh yeah. Tatambude kasura rajinji ke shebe kone torjate shejinji yende shebe kone lanjal tengwara. Tonda rajinji da shejinji de kosa chegwara. She yawar to da rajje banjabani de loti chebja gwara. Ote du tambudal derida. Oh rajinji ke shebe kone torjate tempetre to. Ote kande tsungdosna. 근데 따와 이 주주 날 송번에 시치셔도 레레 담제 찍을다 끌어 그리 쳐할 검세 그래 레레 담제 찍을 끌어 그 강가 되면 섬나 다들이지라 레레 담제 찍을다 쓰게 그 상마 중고대 찍을 도스도 소소리 하래서 뭐라 말아지 진디 만들다 치초는 미션다 시지 두고라 거치 채능할 게 줘서 거치 채능할 때좀 삼사치 이 말에서 저 가르쳐이나 단지만지 롱줄이 전전에다 릴 나사 존에다 가르쳐나 현다같이 전에 깬디 현다 연구 얼마도 이 강가된 연구대 소소 그래서 거라 소소랑 제반지 디왕게 레사 디왕게 대부민기 와라 나벨로리아 코 소소 레 마사는 대부미에 요마라 소소 레사네 대 대부들레 동해 강가 연구하라. 소소 내 마사나 현지 깽코를 제요 말도. 어떻게 그 참마 탐제가 중국대 소소래서 소소 삼르탄다래서 걔는 라치번 좀 랑아 삼 로종 갑선도 참살이야. 당진다 나 삼사 당진다 라치진 님도 속이래. 당진이 공부해야 될 소네. 대주도 또 라치진을 때는 강가 연구하라. 강가 연구하라. 어디서부터 telechunjunan de sumbanashi. Lene tamje chilata kunla kadincho komsiatera. Shanda simje tamje kadincho sambure. Yo kanga rangale sa yorese. Tandele chunjunan de sumda. Jigden dana chawa kanga tas. Jigden liya sosol nebata kare chambandre banne jigden kare ne sosol kanga ya samadiro. Chawa kanga ta sosol neba chinge kare ne. Ane jigda 동해세 jigwa도 간데 지여be 옛날와 동해 jigwe 사요와라 소보야 미모투라 소보야 생기 견체 가르 견치여나 지나 jigwe 지나 대상마 탐제데 라진실레 좋아래 다든지벌 좋아래서 대구 다든지벌 좋아나 대신 대구 달을 지시자 오늘 드레스부 동데 내가 쟁게들 다 내가 쟁게들 드레스 거라 동데 이때 소소 라진지들에서 거라 Geshe devo tali chishas. Ngarajo je rachin je de shivaji kovyara. Taine tik mone samutana ti rala neva kenge gendre tushi de reshat. Ya te kogu medu ti sha ko do songyara. Geshe devo tali chishicha. O timbre. O tiba tu chisona ya.
Yeah. So here then again following this version that is followed in the mind training like rays of the sun, the first lines then of the conventional bodhicitta. So here training in the conventional awakening mind is really done by contemplating the defects of our self-cherishing and the benefits of cherishing others. So this is broken down into various sort of points, but the first is by looking at the defects of our self-cherishing attitude. And this comes in the line, and I'll just read it with the next line: banish the one blame for everything. Banish the one to blame for everything. So this is, I think the other translation is maybe better, where it says banish all blames to the single source, as in our self-cherishing attitude is the source of all of this trouble, and toward all beings contemplate their great kindness. So here in general, whatever sort of troubles and difficulties we face, we tend to blame it on others. We say like, oh, well, it's their fault. This bad thing happened, or something wasn't quite right. I got sick, or these other sort of situations, or some sort of trouble with our finances or something else. We look to someone else. We say that it's their fault. They're the one that caused our problem. But really, it's our own grasping at a self, particularly our self-cherishing. We have accumulated the causes in order to have that experience in the present. So we have created the causes for whatever it is that we are going through. And here, particularly in these mind training teachings, they often put together our sort of self-grasping and this self-cherishing attitude. And so really the source that we can point to for all of our troubles is this self-cherishing attitude. So where it says like to banish all blames to that single source, it is that. And towards other sentient beings, we should contemplate their great kindness. So here, as a source for this, it then quotes from Shantideva saying, if all the harm, fear, suffering, and that exist in the world arises from self-grasping, what use is this great demon to me? And so this self-cherishing is often referred to as like a demon. It's the source of all of our problems. And so we often think that our self-cherishing is somehow something that we need, that it is serving us. But when we really contemplate, we can see that all of the kind of violence, the harm that is within the world, all of the sort of fear, the fear that we have of things like wars and famine, and so all of those kinds of sufferings, as well as all of the various myriad sufferings that exist in the world, all of that arises from this kind of self-grasping, this self-cherishing attitude. So what use is it of it to us?
Oh yeah. That really don't that ranching here the Kanga some good one. Oh, dinner that Mamush Junichi Shundu. Oh, take a do the Casara. Oh, the Dillon Timber. She banned the Sumbanashi Church. Tangone the Chilo, Tangone the Chilo Mata Soso Tesora. Tangone the Soso Yades and Guara. In the co Sem to that Takaris ranching Wanga Kondunga Jetato, Ganga Kuluti and Yamuti and Guara. He won't get you and messages. To do you can so say what you the same assembly at Abu Japche. Case when the same get Kakon Sembi Condalia and a carsore, the Nimble don't the same jet. Nay churches there and a collapse on the churches. Ra. Continue higher trims, color and iron less. And present got them cushion at Yagua. Not ranching the level of Namsada, Quatel Patamne. Pagwadosin Simjet, Nagulia Namsa, Chishun and Nova Shochuara, or Tineshitako, set in the soda, and the ranching Jil Caduina. Best substitute Colia, John Double, Madison, that's your part of the Timaris and Gora. Now, this one.
So here we need to see the fault of this kind of self-cherishing attitude, that this is the source of all of our problems. So the Kadampa Geshes, particularly Kadampa Geshe Peng Kungyal, has a verse where he says that the real enemy isn't outside, it's in here. It's our own self-grasping, our own self-cherishing, and the kind of afflictions that are driven by that. When we have that kind of grasping at an I, then all of our various afflictions arise, and we are the ones creating the causes for our future suffering or happiness. And so here he has another verse that talks about standing alert, like with a short spear, when we like watching our mind, when it when our self-cherishing comes up, you need to be ready to kind of pounce on it, get it. And when that relaxes, I will relax. And so here we should be keeping keeping an eye out. We should be watching for our self-cherishing attitude, watching and being vigilant and alert with respect to that, because we are really the ones that are our own potential enemy in creating the causes of future suffering.
Oh yeah. I didn't do some dog I saw that. Larry Tambakish, Geshe Yeshi. She was just 3 years old, but got the tension condition. She in there. Then someone jungle to social shase. And then someone jungle to some Jason that shase or then some jungle de Ra shasra. And then some time jungle de Shanda resiswa. Or Tiendico 3 years old to some time. Could you tell her Shamato tell a shambe call and the Shanda can be do se? Shanda Benete nor a race of the oh, the Yosamatams ranking with the Yonder Samatams chosen jetteres. What do you do? Get a jaga shalabus. Kisan of your Chishona, Kisan do Shandal dance over each and around Pegivara. John the Buga Rangeles, John the Chitona, John Kishas, John William Gris. The Shant the Kishu Siguris. So the kitchen you see, so the kitchen in the Tadapado, and the Quaco Kanga de Yora, or Tisum that Tasha Chekura, or Tisum that I teach on and read.
So, as the master Langri Tangpa has said as well, in looking at all of the teachings of the Buddha, all of the sutras, the shastras, they all really point to that we are the source of our problems. The I is the source of the problems, and all good things, all qualities come from the kindness of others. And so he said that in examining all of the Buddha's teachings, I have found nothing that comes to any other point than that ourselves, this I, is the problem, and really others are the source of our happiness. And so Langri Tangpa himself has said we should offer all of the sort of winning, and profit to others, and we take the defeat, the loss for ourselves. And so it's really up until now, due to holding ourselves as most important, that we have continued to experience all of these kinds of troubles and suffering. And if we were able to instead exchange that for an attitude of cherishing others, then we would get rid of all of those problems.
Oh, yeah, that's changing you and that them because changing the kitchen Bushagora. Oh, changing you and that them because so Yamso Langja Teres, Tisungua. Oh, this all the Korean Gorsina. Gula cutting show comes etc. Gula cutting show comes. Some Shanda Samalia, cutting Chimbusangore. Kanga Ral never can get Kanga to tea in some Jua Maris. Never can get Chusanga Kanga Society or Sungara. Oh, Chunjula, Chunjula. Make a subject on I answer. And did I yell at any task? I get to Euro Shese. Did I get a Tashi Chamber Sujitas? I don't pass to do in there. Subject the Kanga Todera. Make a subject on I. Chambuda, Chambada, Sivachita, the water Dana, to me Mena, some Sambuto on the Chinchana, Sosa, Roshot, the Show, all up Chimbusagara, the Mega subject on the Transi Chamber Sujitas. Did I near Latin at Sanjay? There's only Chamba cum Niji, cum Chamber, some with Jakene, and it ran San Jaguara. There's no time change in Gudera. Mazu Pisana, Maratoma Risona. Sally Riva, but then said the solid and the Alango Sora. Around the Cuba Kanga, you had the Simja Chisona, the Simja, let's watch some low Tanda Madri, Livichel Madri, till then to Wujayungora. Till it and any Yawai, to Ricciata, me, Nalikibina, to a Kanga Yungora. But the Yavuchi Kuina, the Simja, then the Yavasogara. Marchevole, Tiba Shatum Chatanda, Chambata, Zawata, Shamber, some love Chibuakina. So Yari Lion, the Tarwatam Jimbacaga, Numopani Hadrovada, or T&D. I teach Keshaburation, make some jet on a transition besugita. The Daniel Latineta, Sagan to Euro Shesha. Some Caritana Kioris doing it so Shambel Tenny Honkoda. Yes, she should somebody. Or tell it and Tende, Chujuna Sungda de Casa. Oh, can you try some Betchitash? Teach it, yeah. And did it.
So then we should think about the benefits of this attitude that cherishes others. This is what is to be taken up into practice. So the way this is divided is the thing to abandon is our self-cherishing attitude, and what we should take up is this attitude that cherishes others. And so this comes in the line, meditate on the great kindness of all beings, or toward all beings, contemplate their great kindness. And so here, this is something where we should reflect that, again, all of the problems, all of our troubles and difficulties come from our self-cherishing attitude. And all that is good, the source of our happiness is other sentient beings. So as a verse from Shantideva's Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life says, when gazing at sentient beings or when looking at sentient beings, one should do so candidly and lovingly, thinking, in reliance on them, I shall attain Buddhahood. And so when we interact with others, when we see them, we should do so in a way that is like honest, that is candid, and with a kind of loving attitude where we genuinely wish, may they be happy, may they have the causes of happiness, may they be free from suffering. And going through the world that way, viewing other beings with that kind of wish, is something that allows us to accumulate a great deal of virtue. It is in dependence upon sentient beings that we accumulate the causes that we are able to attain Buddhahood. So all of the good things that we experience in this life, as well as that kind of highest happiness, come in dependence upon others. Therefore, they are the source of happiness. And so it's often said, giving the example of like when you fall down, you have to push yourself back up off the ground. So too, most of our negativities we incur with respect to others. We harm them. We do things that are negative in relation to beings. And so it is through them, that same field, that we are able to repair that by acting with this kind of attitude of cherishing others and doing positive activities toward them. We are able to purify and eventually attain the state of Buddhahood, that kind of highest happiness. So this virtue that is driven by an attitude of cherishing others, really based upon contemplating their kindness, has the power to bring that about.
Oh yeah. 당아도 현대적인 로전의 시행도 현대적인 전주지 semchongse 디셔도 디셔도 가르쳐버려서나 그래서 무시되게 tonglen 자도 시행도 tonglen 자도 잠바다 니지 공네 로 잠바다 니지 공부도 시행도 그 tonglen 니부터 시행도 된다 동시에 잠바전에 파 개와 참마 파다에 됐어도 렌스도 동해에 간거 소소소len에 소소초초 내야 됐어도 다 lem바되게 되는 거 같다 저한테 그다 그저 동해 간거 줄래 동아되게 개와 간거 신할 파 땅에 표소저거 참마 파 땅에 되는 거다 어디 시행하라 동네니부터 어디니로 잠바 공부다 니지 공주도 시행도 다 되니부 또 도르트 파셔나시 다 되게 근데 저한테 들려도 tonglen 공부도 시행하라 무시 tonglen 공부 무시 tonglen 공부들이야 전부 동아대 공부하시 시행도 렘바 공부하시 tonglen 니부 빼말 장하셔야 돼 싸워대 tonglen 니부 빼말 장 동아다 주 렘바 니부대 뺄제 아니 장고래서 보다 tonglen 니부 빼말 장하셔 어디 가서 저 르런지 개자다 제바 참제 샹라다에 로 샹지 겨 참마 탐제 랑가 주다도라라야 저들 무신문에 되라 소소 야가르지 가가 연에 참마 봐 심지어 소소 또래 중소나 또가 뒤돌아 심지어 샹다가 또가 참마 탐제 지된 감리가 참마 출래네 소소 되게 고치고 제송섬 소소롱원에 용배서도 내배서도 너나 내주네 란친진들 내려라 전다 나서가데 먹어서 라친지들 내네 나타다 라친지다 소소니 가가라 니치체 네 갑자기 자살을 수고하라 근데 지단이 감나치 소소 내가 껴도 직강에 직중소나 대강을 참아 예바 참아 출래네 소소대 팀네 배서 나수도 마소네 체르버 친제 나게 템버 중세서리 지쌈 달린 게 와라 아니 야가지 가르네 티파 심지어 심지어도 가가 두가 소소 라네 소소 개와 될 때는 파다네 Konzo tewa dan denpa yu song samsa samla tangi wara. O ti indi de kaza chunju le songpa nashi. Chunju le asi. Ene kaza miyaw na. Kisa shen le tonga chunju le asi. Taagi lu dan longshu dan sikdwa. Taagi lu dan longshu dan. Lu dan longshu le sopa pisum sopa kari ne ti sokra. Kewa tusum tu sabi kewa la sopa tsama. Taagi lu che longshu 자무 또 시거라 아니 개와라 소바 사시베 개와라 소바 강가 다게 류다 론주다 뒤숨 개와 뒤숨 이루아 개와 뒤숨 개바남 뒤숨도 사벤 대바다 마오바다 다다 사시베 참마탐제 심제 군도 주베 치리 방방매바 따와서 심제가 더 주에서도 참마 심제 참마 파 방방매바 땅게 예세 이 성그다야 share some butter. Then they get what teach yeah.
Yeah. So here, then we turn to next the actual development of this attitude of bodhicitta, or this mind of awakening, which is really striving for the aims of others, for the benefits of others. So here, this is sort of divided into this topic of then like taking on your on the breath one's own so it's first meditating on love and meditating on compassion, and then actually going into a brief kind of practice of how one meditates on giving and taking. And so here, this first then when one is training, it says practice a combination of giving and taking. And so here, so another translation would be train in the two, giving and taking alternately. So one trains in this kind of attitude of love, in the sense of imagining giving away all of one's virtues, possessions, even one's body to other sentient beings, and then imagines taking on all of the kind of suffering. So when we go through this kind of exercise, it begins with taking like this idea of love that is giving to all other sentient beings. So whatever good it is that we might have, and here I'll read the verse from Shantideva that goes with this, where it says that for the sake of accomplishing the welfare of all sentient beings, I freely give up my body, enjoyments, and all of my virtues of the three times. And so here we imagine that we are giving away all that is good, all of the good things that we have, our possessions, all of the kind of virtues that we have accumulated in the past, that we are accumulating, that we will accumulate, and that those are going to other sentient beings. And we imagine then taking all of the kind of harm and suffering that other sentient beings experience, and we imagine taking that on and having it sort of get rid of our self-cherishing attitude. So here in this practice, we need to kind of separate out this idea of an I from that self-cherishing attitude, and imagine kind of this is all sort of piling on and taking over that self-cherishing, that we are taking on whatever sort of, in the case that we are experiencing some kind of suffering and difficulty ourselves, we should think that may this suffice for the sufferings and difficulties of other sentient beings, as we are like pulling that in, taking that on for ourselves, and that we are doing, and we practice this alternately. But when one is giving, one should be doing so, giving away, imagining that we are giving our body, virtues, possessions to other sentient beings, and that it is giving them happiness. And we are doing so in a way that is without any kind of regret.
Oh, that be stick Simply could do which is so lady, you think you know what of a kanga. Simply to the Bakari and the troop to get a tinted man pa, Tangadoa. Dinner shake your down, she put some Bakari in the pa. Tanya Condes, simply me internet Tom Jelva. Cabatin Congoda. Yeah, all this sooner.
So we can imagine sort of giving away, like that our body, what we are giving is like a wish-fulfilling jewel, that we are able to fulfill whatever needs other sentient beings have, that we are giving them away and satisfying those needs.
Oh yeah, dan de kasa. Mushi lemba de kongudwa. Lemba nijing o lemba sigdwa.
Right.
Su le tongye da kange chama tamje su rang to le de. Bajo tongye yo chama kange yo chama so su le de. Kumje sa yingji kongwara. Bajo de tongye da traso samsa tek chama rang kan su le samsa kongwara. Oh, de ka so da. Mushi le kapje. Ningji mo su lemba kongba se de. Ta chawa de karesana. Lemba kurim rane tsam shetira. Lembe kore rane tsam se. Tu le kurim de tambu pajo ne tsu rane tsu le tsam se. Lembe kore rane tsam se. O tene ke tawana karim kudesana ke yungdwa tsam des. Simjen ke tunge kyuda cheba tsama tamje de susu tole tsu lemba le ne tsu susu nyawari zi komgiyara. Ke chunju tawana yungdwa. Doye tunge kanchi arungs. Tikun tala minjusi. Roya kangen do yoba sama tamje de soso so lem soso le mi tunge sama. Roya tunge kanchi tikun tala minjusi. Tikun tala minjusi. Roya tunge kanchi tikun tala minjusi. Chanchu simbe kindu je roya tala gobar shos. Shanda soso chanchu simba to pa kane ne roya tamje pe tawa dan tempa she. Shenji kangen sama soso le. Lemba wa tinde komgore sungta. Lobi lodu je jasi dina yungdwa. Tala teta tingmeche, tala teta ke tingwe drebu tsama, tingwa tsama soso nami rangla mimbashe. Dwa, bagi malu tingmeche, soso kewa sabwa, tiusum sabwa kewa ke drebu tsama de shanda simje tamjil paa ngoa ashe kira. Bagi malu tingmeche wase. O tisu, o ta tinde chene, tamlu tanu konghe redwa. O tisu tuna.
So here again on the actual meditation
Meditation.
on the mind of awakening, we have first this line that says sort of practice taking and a combination of giving and taking, and so it continues. Then giving and taking should be practiced alternately, and you should begin by taking from yourself. So here the taking component is sort of has the nature of compassion, and one begins again taking on the kind of sufferings and difficulties of other sentient beings. One can begin with one's own future kind of sufferings and difficulties, but imagine that all of those ripen upon yourself, that you are able to sort of experience those. So here from the kind of way of meditating on this taking practice and generating compassion through that is wishing that by taking on the sufferings and troubles, difficulties of sentient beings, that they might be freed from those sufferings and those causes of sufferings, but that by ripening on you, they might be freed from those. And so here, as it says in the Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, whatever suffering there is for the world, may it all ripen on me. This is the kind of aspiration that you are making, that may all of their difficulties, troubles, sufferings, may they be freed of those, and may they instead ripen on me. And then as well, one makes the kind of wish that, and may all the world experience happiness through the community of bodhisattvas. In turn, may all other sentient beings have happiness. And so then here there is also a line from Nagarjuna wherein he says a similar sentiment. May all of their negativities ripen upon me, and may all of my virtues ripen upon them. So this is the kind of attitude that one is training in through this technique.
Oh yeah. Tata tonglen mambo kongi wara. Tende kongo komde awu chi chane kaje abu chan sona se. Ane tingi lung la ken barsha se te uda. Lung upa ta ya da chu le te ta chane ti chi wara. Ti kare sene ti sem ne ye te to senga chu ya ne wara. Upa ta ya te da chu ngwe te lia. Te u ko yo yo se mi ba la dress ke yo mara. Ta chi kombe ne mi ba ya to dro chi dam da cha ya wara. U te ko le la che pa ta di pa ta ba do se. Chu ta di chu chu de ko tempo re chi te ge ora. le lao ta ne mi ko tempo te ta o tinde ke ba yo so do ya bo je ta bo lung ma chen ba she pa ta chu le tinde she ji kom ne te ne tin lung la ke ba sha she te do o je re do tin lung la ke ba sha she ke so de tinde ka se wa se na tonglen ni bu de se wa ra tonglen ni la ke be tinde ga ju kina lama chebe na la nga chu long chang go ra o ti long chang do de la dong ling long le chen be chue de ge she dong ling ni de chue chen na shi ri chi cha ni she do jam da ni ji lak be sam bai jam ba da ni ji lak sam la so ba che do nam si ju che le chue che jan ju sem le chong ba chin ji lo se jan ju ge sem de chong ba chin ji lo de de kom be to de so da o ti ba to chi to na
So, here, when you have gained some familiarity with this, when you have sort of trained your mind in the practice of giving and taking to a certain extent, have gained some familiarity experience with it, then it says, place the two astride the breath, or these two should be made to ride on the breath. So when we have some familiarity with this idea of giving and taking, we can then do it in a way where we are conjoining it with our breathing in and out. And this is a very sort of useful object to take. We don't lose our breath. Our breath is harder to lose because it's always there. It's something that's kind of stable and can be a good object. And we can then imagine as we are breathing out that we are giving and breathing in that we are taking. So this is something that can help us to kind of stabilize that practice of giving and taking. And so here there is then a verse that is quoted from the Guru Puja that says, please bless me to be able to train in the two minds of bodhicitta, using this sort of, it calls it almost like machinery, like this mechanism of placing the two, giving and taking astride the breath. And with these attitudes of love, compassion, and superior intention, may I free all sentient beings from this ocean of samsara.
Oh, yeah, take this one. Oh, that the mad you put our children. Te pay ya chuju lesson de ma. And the car said, Chaju sem de sonam ka. Oh, that Chaju was sem combe. Pay shadow. Chaju sem combe pay ja. Oh, and then Chaju sem de sonam ka. Delicate suchina. Namge come the quick and the tentative like what you said, the river. Sonam susu to be na. Namge come the park, come by na. Tell a sugar mother said, that's her memories. Karasanati, Samja Tamebara, Tamebara. It's Samal Rangi Kawata Mugiara. There Samja Tamjek to the Sanji Komato to the Pang Mugiara. It's the Samja Tamebachil Mipachet. There Samja rarely be at the Samja Tamjel Muchid. Could pay down the Tamebers Yogara. Dignity, Pen Shabu Soda. It was each Gange Jimmy Tang Geshe. Shigura. Chu Kanga setting as Chu Kanga le share Yungi. Tai Jamzula Kanga Sigda. Tai Jamzuna Chemakasi in it. This is Tanda Ambassador. Gange Dunikasa. Gange Chimetra is Chemakasi in the Titanga. Sanjay Shinam Chemakasi in the Tindek Tanda Yamba Sanjay Shingam Chera. Sanjay Shingange. Rangenda go Rambucha Natunga Sama Jidenji come. Chu Kanga Chime Tanda Yamba Jidenji come to Yabe. Jidenji come to Rambucha Natu Yakani. Next Sanjay Lia Chiba Pua Lesigora. Gandese. Jidengola Pua Vese. Gange Tamu Chargi Dese. Chanju to the Semtu now, Simja Tamjak to do Sanjay Koba Toga Chagi some. Oh, Tinde Samlutan Payasungora. Nicheva didn't Keva Pass, or did the Cheva de Keva to progress. Sanjay Gange Tanda, Chime Tanda Yambenji, then you come here. Rabuchi not to Gisangelia Cheva Tebe Connepin, Sonam Kazasavre. Yometo Rishira. What Teleja Pagwa. 타무차네 심지어 탐지게 또 사계지 거와 토와 적인 섬닝 토번에 타치는 파티 지문에 디펜이 지기를 했어요. 그래서 심지어를 다 매래. 랑문에 심지어 레린 디던 디시 자와서 최송교와 말해. 심지어 강이 마태 탐지게 또 다도 디스도 팽이 전부 연구해서도 얘네 개발 봐세. 달라 타는 마치소서. 최송의 매버리 쓰나면 우리 쓰는 어디부터 지도네요.
Di chunju nerbes. Gumpo ludru marbe.
그래서
Di chunju
나 진주라
no no.
조장대도
Lare. Nyanyimas. So then next we turn to again how we train in this mind of bodhicitta that strives for enlightenment for the sake of all sentient beings. And so here again, this kind of an attitude is one wishing for achieving the state of Buddhahood for the sake of all sentient beings, which is itself limitless, and thereby the kind of benefits that come from that are limitless as well. If we engage in virtue and we dedicate it towards the benefit of all sentient beings, countless sentient beings, then the kind of result that will come from that will likewise be countless, limitless, beyond measure because of the extent of the scope of our intention. And so here from the Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, it says that if the merit of bodhicitta were to have form, obviously it's not a physical thing, but if it were to have form, even the extent of space could not contain it. It would be superior to that. It would be larger than that. And so if one were to take, if a person were to make two Buddha fields as numerous as the grains of sand along the Ganges River, so we can imagine this is almost something that would be beyond able to count, either the sort of atoms of water or the grains of sand that are in that river. And imagine that someone fills all of those realms, those Buddha fields, with the 7 royal emblems, the 7 jewels, the most precious jewels, and were to make that as an offering to the master of the world, to these holy beings. Someone who puts their hands together and genuinely gives rise to this attitude of bodhicitta, their offering, that attitude of bodhicitta would be superior. There is no limit to that. And again, to make such a vast kind of material offering is something that would bring about great benefit. But when we have an attitude that encompasses all sentient beings, that's limitless, that has no extent to it, then the virtue that we create through that also has no extent, has no limit.
다티 가서 근데 꿈내야 약간가 소소체 소소 닝미 수팀발라부터 이제 소소라도 배 떠는 바에 드라로 근데 그 꿈에 그도와 그래서 꿈내야 소소 마데데로 연구냐 이 꿈에 매로 안 내가 근데 마꿈내 되어라 오야 가셔 마데티스지 요한 연구했어라 티치 다드네 데르 니바테 가서 제기념에 다단다디 공무시도 되라 제일 안에 제 삼로타디 제 마고 베네가 제도 세워라 저래 이 제일야 삼다다 시도와 이 가르쳐데 제기 퇴기 참석을 다다디 퇴무시디 공백하시라 다디 제일야 파다 수다 제가가 토안라미라 미기치다 토암족시다 퇴백갑til서라 예숨 도숨 계자숨 세도 아니 제기 맹한 도르데 와세 아니 절음군도 치기 장세 예숨 유이도와마 무슨지라 도숨시도 tellatani 이도와할때니 잡아치기라 이도면 코디기라 발말 때니 지다 남주내신 당제다 념무티 발마티기라 예숨 도숨 tellatani 파매바티 시베 계자숨 용그라 그래서 파매네 대샤매베게 와시다매베게 티모베게 자샤네 계자숨 제기 맹한 도르데 와세 Titanda tonglen yibuti mishi lungla kyoni mishi kumkumkumki ora, ti chima ki nyamli tilisik chetu ki negarso patonde. Migi chiton ramada to amjo trapti pachide sara. Ene chelam kodo tsiki chanse, che son desi. Te kanen danye, semge samluta kanen denbe kone, danye tele tsiki chanse doa, tsiki laki chan. Di sumbara, chetene. Oti chundi mato. Ya tish yoshana.
So here, this is something, again, we are on the kind of main practice of training the mind. And this is something that isn't sort of meant to be bringing you down, but rather a means by which we train and increase the kind of a capacity of our ability to have this mind of awakening. And then we turn to the second topic here, which is really, we've been talking about doing this kind of practice in the context of meditative equipoise, but then there are the times, those intermediate periods where one is not in meditative equipoise, and this then comes in the lines that say so concerning the 3 objects, 3 poisons, and 3 virtues, the instruction is to be followed in brief. Is to take these words to heart in all activities. So here, when it comes to these 3 objects, 3 poisons, and 3 roots of virtues, the 3 objects here are those objects that we take to be pleasant, sort of unpleasant, and neutral. And the 3 poisons then are our attitudes of attachment and hatred and ignorance, which we generally have sort of attachment toward those pleasant things and aversion towards those things that are unpleasant, and still have that kind of delusion with respect to intermediate sort of neutral objects. And then there are the 3 roots of virtue, which are the opposites of that, are virtues that come from non-attachment, that come from non-ignorance, and come from non-hatred. And so here we should, in all ways, as it says, in all actions, train by means of the words. As we put the practice is to take these words to heart in all activities, in the sense that as these words indicate, we should train in a way that really integrates into our mind.
Oh yeah. Tadika sura. So chetu ki negab so megu tana abjo nya chito ne tsoa ke ngura. Yu yito wa ta mahoma chidangara to samlura kore tanjo te kande chorsan chitana so koya ro chida. Chitinde kardo pendora Suru Tatnik Suru Chivara. You do want to go tea of the was, or tea of Madoa, Yoda. So Kuma Kuchanachi, you do want to know the tissues touching Surgiora. Or tea in the energy. You do want to toss on a television Jakura. You do more as a thunderstorm, meet the young lips or some young condensate at the Tayungura. Oh, Tinti, member to Jenny Palmer Namjunashi. The Karchajan Korate to be second, Timuchigara, Maripati, Netsu Maripama. O Tindeke better social condo of Chikesona, Titicum Sungara. Simjan Tama Tamjagi condo Kajana, Tisamang condo telesu Timne. They got coaches on some Intercom Gosungara. And she said, Najer of China, Tanashi. Deja condo Naje, Napsin, Napsela Sobakara, Kiguna. O Tedati, Simjan Tamjag, Tisamatsulan, Society Latimne. Conto Tamate, Deja Mebek, or Shitamebek, Timo Mebek is a Pisum Soba Yuson, Samsa, Comgora. Not in the Kanen Dane, in the Jewish was a Kanen Dane, or in the Giant or Tisunda. No.
So here in post-meditative periods where we are interacting, I mean, we see things, we hear things, and so forth, then we have to sort of deal with our various senses. And this means that often when we see an object that we find attractive, we will feel some sort of attachment to that. When we see something that is unattractive, we feel a kind of aversion or an animosity. Things that are neutral, we still have our normal ignorance, our ignorance of the actual reality of things. And so here, when we are dealing with interacting with various objects, having our various afflictions come up, when we identify, say we get angry, and we are in the process of pacifying that anger, we should have the thought, may this like suffice for all of the anger of all other beings. May it sort of take away and pacify the anger that they feel. So when we have a kind of affliction like that in relation to a particular object, we should have that sort of thought and articulate it with words as well. And in the case of when we have something like our virtues that come from non-attachment and non-anger and so forth, we should also make that as a dedication. May all sentient beings become like that. So in that way, even in the post-meditative period, we are taking the kind of ethos of that taking and giving and conjoining it with our way of practicing and taking that up even through the words.
Oh yeah. That kind of check to cha, kind of doing a nyamdo, kind of doing the community, is some good order. I check to check connect us. Dala to that teamings. Tage malu teamishes. Because it take what someone has to run me. Raggy gave up to someone part me. Simply couldn't don't get all of me. Tage gave it to good tower shows. Then I say, Roy don't get canchiaro, the good all of me, you see. Chancho Simbe can do ye, draw tell a chamber shows. All the rich in it. Molam Jade, Yanti, Comcudua, all this interest.
In terms of then, so sort of take these words to heart in all activities is one way that it has been translated. And in the other, I think this maybe is a better one, in all actions trained by means of the words, or sort of what it is really saying is that we are training our mind and we can conjoin it with these types of words, like this kind of putting it into the form of an aspiration or a prayer, like may all of the negativities of beings ripen upon me, and may all of my virtues ripen upon them. Whatever, all of the sufferings of sentient beings, may that ripen on me, and may all of my virtues bring them happiness. And like the verse that we had before, where it was talking about whatever sort of suffering there is in the world, may all of it ripen upon me, and may all the world experience happiness through the community of bodhisattvas, or the benefit of bodhisattvas. So in that way, as we are training our mind, we can use these words in order to enhance that practice.
Oh yeah, that did do matter. Don't I do somebody and do something, sir. Lochon, because Lochon attention somebody that. Yang a chanjulam to Churasa, Yang a chanjulam to Churas. Yang a chanjulam to Churasa. That Yang and Bakari Chuinate, Yanjulam to Churat, you shake it. Oh, till my shit is a Karishagurasena. Tambu Yang a chanjulam to Chura, Dortem Bachim Budwa, Geshe Yeshi Budwa, and Dortem Batrata, Yang a chanjulam to Churian Dortem Bat. Did Chunju Nalibuda. Nishu Tibet Kawe says, the Yang a chanjulam to Churus. Negi Jigdan Darwa, Chugisim Jet to the Samasora. No, said the Negi Jigdan Suda, just the long chiba for the Suda. The Zukangan Jigdan come Nemu Tuzula Soba Kanga Yora, or Tenacisim Jelatunga Yora, Tendeka Blasura. Nishu Tibet Debugia, Kulne, Nude of Shiva, Capitala. Yang a chanju lam to Jutu Samatamja, Sanji Jacoba to be Chanjuki, Lam to Park Kurto Bache would answer, thought to put on some co, from simply said, and the Cape Mara, the only one John Jonsara, this summer park Kevala Curia Tapsi would answer. New Tibet, as a Yang a chanju lam to Churusa. And then the Clearly, I can consider Otto and Shannon and Ditches of good teaching the name of Metro. She see Rana that the condemned. She see Rana, Tradma Tongi Party Suta. Tramway to Soso Tonga, and you trash and she Tatagora, when there was some Mega Payora. That when they tried the Rana Trama Tobato Sugara, Madiba Sama Soso Samratanda, Rachin in the Tansin that the Rewanga, Jan Kaka Kanga Yokuto, Samsati, Shankura Sungura. This is Rala Trama Tonge Pardo, Ra. They ring Delia, Lama Sosu, I kept to Kumare Sora. Rala Tarton Sona. And then Panda Sion, what tennis, Gina Social Panta at Yokuresura. This on the Kedana, Nese Kai, La Tartar, Tom Babashera, Kanji, Ragi, Randa, Ranchin, Davatilia, Tarta Shanko, the Ese. This on the what about the chicken?
Mhm. So then we will move to the third point, which is taking adverse conditions onto the path to enlightenment. And so here, this is taught in this commentary with 2 points, a kind of brief overview and then a more extensive explanation. And so the brief overview comes in this line, where these 2 lines, where it says, when the environment and its inhabitants overflow with unwholesomeness, or it sort of boils over with negativity, transform adverse circumstances into the path to enlightenment. And so here, when we talk about the environment, that's sort of the external environment, as well as those beings that inhabit it. When all of that is sort of a boiling over with negativity, we should instead try to transform those circumstances into causes for enlightenment. Like if we worry, if we say like, oh, this is really bad, and we worry, that doesn't do anything to help the situation, but rather we should make an effort to transform those circumstances into something for virtue. And so as the great Geshe Potawa has said, as long as we don't see that we are the enemy, or our self-cherishing really is the enemy, then no one can protect us. So as long as we're not aware of what the real problem is, we might search for some sort of protector or some other kind of solution, but there's not anywhere to find that. But as soon as we search or as soon as we kind of recognize that, then like everyone becomes your friend. The sort of other beings we are able to recognize their great kindness and so forth. So really, we need to recognize that the real enemy is internal. It's not someone else out there.
Oh yeah, Tadinga to Kasara. Neji Jide. Lota shooting Jude Nikaya, Kangera, Yuba Capilla, and you have some much as you lam the Chuasa Borisora, or teach you Tantina Uda. Neji Jude, the Miko Chu Tande, Sayum Jayala, so what I should charge you Maula, so what I think the young Yora. Nay, I'm dropping the young Jordan. She just some jet to the Kanga, and if some jet in your mole, Tata Mosumra, and lega chete meki vele la to mato meba. Te chusenki tende nimar chune ne chin jambulin da jambulin nege mitu to kanga ni chin ni kale akuba mabu chune nimar dudu sane te nime chule le te parcho chime la da te so yan lungba shenda le chonga du de ser yudwa. Dal ka ve la lu te dal ka ve la da lu parcho le ka ve la to neg mare se. And it's church gets a lot of my way of good essay. Never to take what she be sure, and the sugar should put to the young and mambo, runs in when I see good essay. And should the dashi, oh, king there. Did it should the dashi get court shoe and answer, take what she be tonglen as over to the church. And get the changing tongue on this, only take a Gaye Ganga changing to Gura, Chita Gaye radio at the Tiso Kiawatune, Tamse Chimbe Kovan to the Julpa Jurgura. Or Titan Gaye Ganga de Nabjung and Gaye Rese, Mendova Share Ganga de Chundusa, Ellen Deva Tandulan and so Tangi Kovan to the Chuli Jurgura. Gaye changing to Jur. Parche trust your parche of Karicho in a tico, Chanju Sem Comia, the only Comia got trust at Yushayara. Never Kivashina. Ronald never can get tired of Shinati, Kivashin. Kiran Kyong Amala Santin, you go at tikpele masa kiwele so singera labje tenge chero chilia koko re sungara chanchu drebe kasara kiwe shingi do share kone kenge chanchu lamdo drebe charo ti sam ke kari chuna chanchu drebe lana mebe chanchu koban tobe kyule pa jura chigres o te bode chikuna.
So here, where we have this line that says, when the world and its inhabitants boil with negativity, when we think about this kind of degenerate age, when we have all sorts of negativities, there are, we can see things like earthquakes and pandemics and the kind of natural disasters and war and so forth. And the beings, the inhabitants of this world are overcome with their various afflictions. Their activities are largely sort of negative. So here, when the external world is really experiencing the great negative results of non-virtues that have been committed, and the beings within it, the beings who inhabit this, really do nothing besides think about their afflictions, and thereby are just doing negative actions. So when we look at the kind of situation that we are in due to that kind of being in this degenerate age, it is said that those sort of forces that like the negative, so gods and kind of demons and nagas and so forth, have greater strength in this degenerate age. And in general, that means that those who enter into the Dharma experience more harm, and particularly that those that enter into the Mahayana are subject to various adverse kinds of conditions, and so when one has entered into this path, then you have to learn how to take adverse conditions and transform them into conducive conditions. Sort of all of the unwanted circumstances that we meet with, we have to learn to shift them, transform them into something that can become the cause of enlightenment. And so too, all of the sort of obstacles that we encounter, those things that seem to be stumbling blocks, we should learn how to take them up, how to sort of use that situation to our advantage as like friends. And particularly when those who cause us harm, we should learn to see them like virtuous spiritual friends. When we have someone that is causing us harm, rather than looking at them as our adversary, we should see how are they giving me this kind of it, or what kind of advice are they giving me. So it is by way of habituating or practicing in that way that a bodhisattva becomes able to take adverse conditions and sort of make friends with them or use them on the path to enlightenment.
Oh yeah. That thing I change lamdo chua never sheba thing good. That we didn't do share. That never sheba thing good. Oh, Jellicarium dosina. Samba kever chanju di simlatene. King I change lamdo curare. Oh, the kever sheba theorisha. Oh, chanju simlatene. That is all Karium dosna. Tell a count to come to Charles at it. Tell a count to come to Charles at it. Tawade. Oh, take our sumudosina. Tell a tete to send negum kange to carry high in a row. Tell a kange carry to way in a. They come to Charles. Give it to you in a draw. To put you to in a draw. So Lumbel tebe to in a draw. Lumba Shendal tebe to in a draw. Net from Sipta from Jakawate in a draw. So draw meeting yam to tell in a draw. The root of tending yam to tell in a draw. She not of dressing raw. Oh, in a draw. Ne Lusim getting to Tunge. Lu da similar to a lily to it, not sort of today. I write cat law to do to it. Similar not so that is so. Namdo Samlatana ko like a trout or chim my dinner to me, my boy, what does the Congress? To me, changing so some can't join answer. Then Jidangi come Tamebana. So let the courage on Sonea. Jidangi come Tamebana, you have Simbian Tezolia. Tinde Junge Gagrana, she to me the Junge, Tezama Suzukan Sulingiora. Get a bit to me, Toto Baba, to my years at that Tamje. Tunge 동해지 다게 동해지 고쳐버 교지에서 소소나야데 고쳐버 교지 탐제 동해 말루바다 대조 동해 삼아 고쳐네 소소대수 템베 땅돌라네 예 고쳐네 인제버체 먼저 녀먹어 살아 되네 동해 탐제대 대월 교지에서 동해 렘베코네 수 땅돌람 소소 렘베코네 아니 닝지 동해대 대송 삼사가 고 닝지 공야 네 삼바탁반에 가외 일하죠. 그래서 참아 동해대 대송 삼 그래서 가외 제수 일하지 그래. 어디 받치잖아. 뭐를.
So here then we get to a more extensive explanation of transforming adverse conditions to the path to enlightenment. And so here this has various sort of topic headings, but particularly based upon this special sort of thought of bodhicitta, how one does this, how one transforms these adverse conditions into conditions for the path. And then sort of how one through purification and accumulation of merit is also able to do this. But here, beginning with first, independence upon this special attitude of bodhicitta, how one takes adverse conditions as the path. And so here it says then, so apply meditation immediately at every opportunity. Or we could say that it relate whatever you can to meditation right now. As in, whatever it is that we are experiencing, whether we are happy or whether we are experiencing some kind of suffering, whether we are in our own area or in somewhere else, whether we are in a town or really out in the middle of nowhere, whether we have friends with us or not, whether we are experiencing some kind of suffering of body and mind, whether it is great or middling or small, whatever sort of circumstances we are facing, we should use those circumstances and transform them into the path. So, for example, when we are ourselves experiencing some kind of suffering or body of mind, we reflect upon how in this world there are infinite, limitless types of suffering that sentient beings endure. And we think about our own suffering and wish that it might suffice for, that it might substitute for the sufferings of other sentient beings. So instead of feeling this sort of extra weight of our suffering, we are taking on the suffering of others. We are wishing for their sufferings to be alleviated through our experience of suffering. And similarly, we wish then that through that they might be freed from all of their sufferings. And also by taking on sufferings, we deepen and in general increase our attitude of compassion and that sense of wanting to benefit others. And when we are experiencing good things too, we can use that as an opportunity to rejoice and to be happy for the happiness of others. So whatever kind of circumstances we encounter, as it says here, we should relate it to meditation right now.
Oh yeah, that did it down to Kosa. Joy Keberche, the child, the Teletene. Joy Keberche, Sakjani, the Tene, Yangalam to Curasido. Joy Keberche, Sabas, Kevasabata, Tibetan, Sakjan, native Sakjan. Oh, Sakjani, the Tene, the Yangalam to Curasity. Oh, Telecari Udosene. 저한테 좋아하신데 탑기 초세더라. 좋아하신데 탑기 초세. 좋아하시디 가르스는 좋아하던 뭐 초사바시더라도 초사바. 제가 그걸 써보다 조사에 가리네 그렇지 삼아. 니바디 대파 좋아하시게. 대파 가사바 삼아셔야 돼. 좀 안에 다는 쳐봐시도. 당게라 써봤지를 쳐봤지. 시바 애들이 표정을 써봤지를 또마표에 Oh, tesurete toa. Tandelete kasora. Rere tesushana ni tirishira kasora. Oh, tumi chua, tumi chutuba kua. Tambu chora sosa pasira. Lama da kunjola soba tesole cheba piyeche, roa. Kinti tele nyegula soba tele cheche. Ane roa. Ane tata rab tesole a torma chineroche. O tesu te cherda. Ane ba tikwa chaya tesole a kunjola ki chengara. Shakwa chaya. Sombatene tala cheba shetrasha. Nöjel tosule torma trachi. Nyambara te bevache te chewda. Chanju jesem nila taki di ore simje tamjege. Ragi nyoya te kocheba churus. Oda tender se digdo. Titi kushana. Maudasha.
So then we turn to the second sort of topic of taking adverse conditions onto the path of enlightenment, which is talking about doing so in dependence upon this special kind of practice or application, which it comes in this line that says either the supreme method is accompanied by the four practices, but really it's more like the fourfold practice is the most excellent method. So here, the fourfold practice, the four applications here are referring to first accumulating merit. So doing things like making offerings and so forth are ways that we accumulate that kind of positive potential, and offerings to the Buddha, the Dharma, the Sangha, and so forth. And then there is the purification of our negativities. So to make those kinds of efforts at purifying in front of the presence of the Buddhas and so forth, to confess and then engage in activities to purify one's negativities. This is the second of these four methods or four practices. And then there is making offerings to the kind of interfering spirits, as well as offering tormas to the Dharma protectors to entrust their enlightened activities. And so these four practices, we could say, are the sort of supreme method in that accumulating merit and purifying negativities, as well as making these kinds of offerings to spirits and entrusting the activities of the Dharma protectors.
Oh yeah. Tadiri dama to kasa. Chede nyamle du tine tabas gdwa. Chede nyamle du tine tabas. Ditawate. Toma tala chawar cha setre. Toma tala chawar cha. Toma ser shedo sheso de. Tela pembetos kulon til shidwa. Pembeto. Pembeto che. Tene. Pembeto. Karbo saben je top che. Switching beto. Tikwa shatom shetra. Malam jaye top. Ote tonga shidwa. Tambo pembeto shed karsene. Chanju mato je pato. Ra. Ne chidato. Mashi chunje pato. Ta tuzure je sanje ko mato pato. Yana mashi chunje pato sero. Ana nima tiringi rindu sero. Ote nde yusi pata she shed dora. Yan lodan dawa da tiring nimu sero tendecha. Nisha chukchi dilasin. Nisha tiring nima ta changi ringla sero. Tusu ta che shed. Nyama bata nyewe nyama ba. Nyama da nyama ba wando meton wa nyabe. Ta tiring nima teli ange kondo da nga je thado le soba kaya me che samsa. Kiwando tangi me samsara. Yana che chisi choy ba. Yana sanje kowa mato basara. Ambo tusu re shane ya yusar to madure na. Tiring nimu te sero. Nima chil chana ne. Nima niba teli. Tiring nima nyigringa su sumgiran dawaringa ya kesho gara. Ote taachene re pa kichedera. Hebe topsede, samlo taache. Chanchu mato jipato seneda. O teni ya tendiringa sinera, nisha chigiringa sinera, tende samlatache. Ye partone, nyuma beshawante tang mesam, kondure sabu yunata tiringa ngone kondure wante tang medasam, pepso chiche mbanyam to rutin namjina shi membache. Tato chigane, tene kondure chon shudre, ta chuchurichira, notis mura. Ato metonya bekulunji pembaton yatela, pembe topsidoa, topsinane. Nibatele karsidosna, kabu sabyo je topside. Chanchu laname chanchu mato pato, right? Mato pato lamri le soba kewa tu kanga maji ba kewa te neba ta mai ba kone kondo kewa o tende chigi sa chimba chute soba samden le soba te kewa re chania soba chigi samsa kabu sabyo je top te da tele chungi samsa te gwa namba swin chimbe top si tikpa changmal bhasha to chedo tangzin da te chambe rashi zila soba te zo nima chigiraga dawa chigiraga seti de ba samche chingje Shaya partula sabata shitsane tindese tatmende.
야와토로.
O tinde tache shepa. Kishiatelia. Nabasu jimbetos. Ikpetos sigara.
Yeah. So then we turn to the next topic of the 7, that is the summary of practice in a single lifetime. And this comes then with the 5 powers. So here in the text, it says train in the 5 powers. So the 5 powers refer to, and of course there's always different English translations, but I'm going to go with the power of projection or the power of intention, the power of the white seed, the power of eradication, the power of prayer, and the power of familiarity or habituation. So the power of projection is really making the kind of intention. We set our intention, we project that or throw that forward. And so generally we make an intention like, well, until I reach enlightenment, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. But we can do that on a regular kind of basis. We can project, well, for this lifetime, and we try to keep a certain kind of commitment, or maybe it's just for this month or this week. If we particularly say have a lot of anger, for example, if we make the kind of intention where we say, well, today at least I'm not going to get angry, making that kind of intention, projecting that is definitely going to be helpful in reducing our anger. So here, setting that kind of intention is the power of projection, the power of intention. And so here, one can make this kind of intention of any length of time, but we think, I'm not going to come under the control of my afflictions, and make and sort of set that out. And then there is the power of the white seed. And so this is something where it's like sort of fostering what we have already generated in the way that we talk about increasing those qualities that we have already generated and developing those that we have not yet generated, and perfecting those that we already have, and so forth. This is the kind of attitude wherein we have a seed that we have started and we think, I'm going to increase this, develop it more and more. I'm going to make an effort at the accumulation of merit and wisdom by training in generosity and ethics and meditation and so forth. And then there is the power of eradication. In general, this is kind of the power of confessing and purifying, but here in particularly recognizing the defects of our kind of self-grasping and the self-cherishing attitude that comes from that, as well as seeing the defects of that self-cherishing and the kind of casting aside the interests of others. By way of seeing that, we give rise to this effort in eradicating it. Like, I am going to get rid of that.
Oh yeah, that just household.
Yeah. So we are out of time for today. We still have 2 powers though to get through, so we'll pick up there in the afternoon.
Yeah.
Rinpoche ma ke panam ke gyurche ke panyam pa me pa ya kone kondu kawa sho.
Bit under. Bit ocean. The contact well. Akash. Touch. Come.
Thank you, everyone. We'll meet back here at 2 o'clock.
Recording stopped.